Welcome to Q Talk. And this is like the breaking news Wala segment, a continuation of the the story we carried out, which was yesterday, about the Taliban taking over Afghanistan, because it's no news that Taliban has taken over Afghanistan, the presidential palace, they've won the presidential palace, the president of Afghanistan has fled, and we are more concerned. Yes, we're concerned about the entire citizen of Afghanistan, their welfare, and because of we saw the brutal rule from 1996 to 2001, the brutal rule of the Taliban, and we are scared that's going to come back. But we are more concerned about the lives of the LGBTQI community members in Afghanistan. And today we are happy that an insider, the first man that came out openly as gay in Afghanistan, Nemat Sadat is joining us today. Welcome, Nemat. Thank you so much. Did I get your name right?
Thank you. No, it's perfect. It's a pleasure to be here. I think I appreciate you for your concern for the Afghan people and for our common humanity, for LGBT people everywhere. And I think we should all be concerned about what's happening right now.
So thank you very much, Nemat. So Nemat, I'll first like to start with a question. How is the situation like for the LGBTQI community members in Afghanistan? Have you gotten any word with them? Just give us a brief insight. What's happening in the community?
Yeah, so everyone's on edge. Some people do not have any recollection that the people who I'm trying to evacuate right now, to airlift into who are the most vulnerable. These are people whose family have kicked them out of the house. They decided to start their own life. Some of them are single. Some of them are with their partners. And these people, if their family was not willing to accept them for their sexuality, how would the Taliban? The Taliban would see them as enemy combatants, because under their interpretation of Islam, they believe that a person who's LGBTQ has committed 3 cardinal sins. First of all, being a homosexual, that's one sin that's unacceptable. The second one, embracing the lifestyle, that means you're a lapsed Muslim. It's impossible to be, in their interpretation, both LGBT and a devout Muslim. So you consider them an apostate. And for especially the men who are practicing, like they're assuming they would do sodomy, so you're considered a sodomite. So your 3 offenses, the 3 most egregious offenses that you could have in Islam. So they would be like an enemy combatant. They are the biggest threats to holding the social fabric intact in society. So they would be automatically wiped out. No conversation whatsoever. And the situation was not that good. I mean, we talk about massive gains for women and for ethnic minorities in the last 20 years. But LGBT people, yes, they did have incremental gains, but they still had no rights. There was no rights to them enshrined in the Constitution. They could be criminalized. LGBT people would be fined we're talking about Hamid Karzai, Ashraf Ghani, the democratic elected, liberal, Western-oriented government. We had elements within those governments that would basically take people who are LGBT, bring them to prison, fine them, rape them, and then let them go. Or people that were involved in in the National Directorate of Security, that they had funds that were dedicated to look for terrorists, but they would redirect their resources and tap into groups to find gay and bisexual men, and go and lure them into these honey traps to get them to show them, shower them with love. So it's a very sad situation when you have a lot of these gay and bisexual men who are so desperate for love, they don't receive the love that they need from their friendships, from their family, and then they're thinking maybe they can find romance, and then they end up finding somebody who's an imposter, and this imposter takes them on a date and then takes them out somewhere where they're planning to go and put a gun to the head and kill them. And the reason why I know this is because I had a person who escaped, and one other person who the killer actually had remorse because they had belonged to the same village and the same ethnic clan. So the guy knew the guy's family and said, no, I'm not going to kill you. And this is what I was here for. And mind you, this gay cleansing policy happened again under the democratically ruled country. And while the Western world didn't see that. So can you imagine, don't you think the Taliban would do the same thing? Of course they would, in a heartbeat. So once the one thing that Taliban has mastered this time around, from as you described the horrors of the 1990s, is that they know that, especially with social media, and they know very good how to master, how to taking a selfie, how to brand themselves, how to protect their image. So what they're doing is they're going to wait until the cameras are off, the people have left, the foreigners are left, and then they will start punishing people. And actually, they've already started punishing people at nighttime, going door to door, looking for traitors. Now, the easiest traitors to spot are probably, like, for example, the first woman Air Force pilot. If they can find her, she's a big prize, because she was an Air Force woman pilot. That's like a no-no for a woman job. Then she was dropping bombs on these Taliban, right? So they're going to go after her first. But they would also look for people who served as Afghan soldiers, because they were fighting them. They would look for interpreters for the their army, Afghans who interpreted translation work. They would look for journalists who basically kind of did social engineering by promoting too many values that were like Western oriented and against Islam. So they would go after those journalists, or journalists that basically said any negative things about Pakistan, because there are, after all, agents of Pakistan. Mind you, these terrorists, because Taliban are terrorists, what they did, the way they took over this democratically elected government, came from across the border in Pakistan. They're not even from Afghanistan. It's like, could you imagine like somebody coming from neighboring Nigeria, from another country neighboring, and coming and taking over and telling them, like, destroying everybody in Nigeria and saying, like, you know what, sorry, you guys, we're taking over the show. That would be unacceptable to Nigerian people. It would be unacceptable to the world. But here, it's like the United States cut a deal with these Taliban, surrendered to the blackmail of Pakistan, because after 20 years of this cat and mouse game, by Taliban saying, oh, by Pakistan saying, we didn't support these terrorist acts, we don't do it, but we know in the end they did. And because they have a nuclear weapon, no one has the courage to stand up to Pakistan. So the LGBT people is like, you know what? If the United States doesn't have the courage to stand up to Taliban in Pakistan, who are we? How are we going to defend it?
So, Nemat, so I would like to ask, we talked about it in our last episode we did about the Taliban judge, that was Gul Rahim, who said that the penalty for gay men would be that they will be rammed into walls, and they're going to be by public execution, public flogging. They're going to make sure that they cleanse the Afghanistan of their ways. So we those are very horrific tales, whether we like it or not. So we're wondering, is there anything that is being done by NGOs? Because we know that there are lots of NGOs, non-government organizations or charity organizations that claim to defend the rights of LGBTI community members. First, is there any evacuation, or is there any airlift for LGBTI community members that's ongoing, that is currently going on in Afghanistan? That's the first question. And the second question for me is that, is it right in a way that can the Taliban judge actually do that? Can the Taliban judge just say, oh, they are rammed into walls, and can that really happen? And I'm surprised. The first one, is there currently an airlift going on in Afghanistan?
Yeah. So what, they were talking about the door-to-door, going to door-to-door. The LGBT, how would they know who's LGBT or not, right? So they would know because of rumors, suspicions, because some of these people were quasi out, quasi not. The other thing is that they could easily confiscate a person's phone and say, give me your phone, who are you, what are you doing? And so a lot of the people that I'm corresponding with, a lot of them are, after we have a conversation, they're deleting the messages. So if that's it, you have a conversation with Nemat Sadat, that's it, you're definitely gay, and you're definitely, to get back to your point, I think that the airlift situation, what I'm doing right now, I have a list. There's the thing is, there's millions of LGBT people in Afghanistan. I'm not going to be able to get all of them out. That's just a reality. I'm going to try my best. My goal is to get at least a couple thousand out, and I'm going to pressure the United States. I'm going to just as the Taliban blackmailed the United States and the Pakistan did into submission to horrify, I'm going to blackmail them in terms of holding up the United States and be like, listen, you guys have been shamed by the rest of the world, and I have the world's media attention right now. I have the world's support right now. And if you don't do this, if you don't hold your promise and get our allies out of there, then you're going to be held accountable. And you're holding accountable is like, you're going to lose your standing and respect in the world, which you've already lost. But also it could threaten you losing your seat in the next election. because I think this is very important, that this is a very important situation. So, but I've been received assurances that I would be receiving support to get these people out. So I'm very confident that this first list of people, which is about 100 people, that this first list that they've generated, this is the most vulnerable people, the most people that like constantly every single minute, where are we going, when are we taking off? These people are probably gonna get out. Now, subsequent flights, it depends on how good I am at negotiating and lobbying. But the one thing is that once you set a precedence and you get one flight out with 70 people, well, then like, we're gonna abandon the other people. So I'm gonna say, as anybody, just as some lawmakers in the Democratic Party, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders said, anybody who wants to get out should get out, because it's a humanitarian crisis. It doesn't matter whether you work with the Americans, you didn't work with the Americans, whether you are LGBT, whether you're not LGBT. I think that, you know, if you fear the Taliban, you should be able to get out. There shouldn't be a pecking order, you know. But the only thing is, for me, there are people contacting me and says, oh, I'm not LGBT, can you please help me? And I'm not turning them away. I said, give me information, I'll make a list. But my goal, don't take time and energy away from my goal to help LGBT people, because nobody is going to help LGBT people if I don't help LGBT people. Yeah. So this is my priority. There's already many groups of people that are helping Afghan journalists, Afghan interpreters, Afghan students, Afghan civil society, women, whatever. But like LGBT, I'm like, well, you know, I'm like, this is the only group. I mean, Afghan orphans. So I think like this is, I need to do this, because if I don't, then who is? Who's going to take that initiative? So on the ground, logistically, it's a nightmare. You know, you seem to be very well versed in what's going on, because we have that all the borders are sealed. Kabul is kind of sealed. There's checkpoints. Could you imagine having a bus full of like LGBT people going through the checkpoints and having Taliban like seeing who's in here? It's going to be very obvious who's this crowd, right? It's going to be obvious it's not like soldiers or what have you. So that's a very tricky situation to get to the airport. So I don't know how we're going to get to the airport and get on these aircrafts, but my goal is to do that.
That's true. So Henry, would you like to ask a question? Do you have any question in your mind?
The only question on my mind is, how can we, other LGBTQ communities, help and assist you guys in, you know, in your plan to escape and in your plan to relocate to new places?
That's a very good question. I mean, I know that, for example, like there is the LGBT community within the government of France. They contacted me and they said that they are putting pressure on people, ministers within their government, to help LGBT people come to France and come to other EU countries. So that's something that maybe you guys can do. I don't know. I mean, what is the position of Nigeria? If you guys are able to take in any support, or if there's any logistical support you guys can provide, any kind of moral support, any kind of support you guys can do for these refugees, because this airlift will be leaving and will be when their first destination will be somewhere in the region. And I really don't want to disclose where the carrier will go, because just to protect the safety and security, but it will be going to a U.S. military base or U.S. embassy in the region, not too far away from, and maybe somewhere in the Middle East or Eastern Europe, you know. And then from there, they will be grounded, and then they will decide to go stay there, and then decide what their fate will be, getting asylum and resettling and rebuilding their lives. But I think that in terms of, I think it will be very important for them to have a community, not just a community of like, maybe for them to like within themselves, not all of them just go to different places. Maybe that they're all like, all this group of people that I'm taking, like about 100 people, it'd be nice if they could all be in one country or one city or one, one kind of a place, so they could maybe help each other, right? So that would be really nice. But also if they could be in contact, maybe with LGBT community in Nigeria, in other countries, so that they could establish these networks. There's all kinds of things that could happen in terms of they can provide their experience and talk about what their experience has been like to your society, and then your Nigeria's experience, obviously the LGBT community is way more advanced than Afghanistan, because you guys have had a little bit more room to grow. You know, you guys haven't had people worried about, oh my God, these people are gonna hack me to death if I just like talk about LGBT. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of opportunities that you guys can provide them leadership and moral support, and just friendship and just love, you know, because a lot of these people are broken, they're broken. They want to commit suicide. And I think it's one thing to say that you want to call a suicide hotline, but I think that, you know, to me, that feels kind of superficial. I think building more enduring friendships, and really, you know, kind of going a little bit more deeper is a little bit more important. So I think those are the kind of relationships that one could really build, and really to build an international movement. Like, one of the reasons why I was so inspired to write a novel called The Carpet Weaver is that I was hoping that, you know, what the Brokeback Mountain did in terms of popular culture in the US and the West, that my novel would do, like for Asia and the Eastern world, in terms of changing the attitudes and paving the way for LGBT rights and gay marriage. And I think that it like being a petition for, you know, this movement. And I think that somehow even the small social networks that we have, it can make such a huge impact. Could you imagine, like, if several hundred people or 7,000 people, like, they come out of Afghanistan and they're able to connect and as a community and connect with other LGBT, and then impact LGBT rights in Afghanistan, and then they can serve as role models and leaders in other countries too. And so it would really have a huge, profound effect, because visibility is very important. And I think we need to do that, especially countries within the global South. I think we shouldn't always look at our role models to be, you know, in the developed North, and say like, okay, you know, this should be our role models of, you know, and looking at like Stonewall and like that's where the movement started. We all know that those are kind of a little bit of a myth. There was gay revolutions or communities that happened in different times and different periods. Like one of the things that I found out doing research, that you may already know this, that Berlin, prior to Nazi Germany, Berlin was the gay capital of the 19th century, and it had more gay and lesbian bars, newspapers, salons, like, you know, just art, everything in terms of the arts than anywhere else. And it was legalized. So really, no one ever talks about like Berlin being the place before Stonewall. It's like after the Nazis came, put LGBT people into concentration camps. Then after that, the US and other countries came in, and they kind of just pinkwashed and just kind of erased all that history. I mean, the Nazis erased it, but they also erased it in the sense that they created, like, people forgot. Now Germans are rediscovering their LGBT heritage. Like, oh my God, we had this great civilization for LGBT that we didn't even know about. And the same thing, like for Central Asia, like a lot of countries, like from Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, you know, Turkmenistan, all these countries north of Afghanistan, all of these are extremely traumatized countries because they have no LGBT depiction in art, in movies, in culture, because under Soviet Tsarist Russia, they like erased everything. And even so, there's nothing there. So I think it would be really fascinating to have these cross-cultural connections and pollinations. I think it would be really fascinating.
Thank you very much, Nemat. It was a very interesting conversation with you, and I've learned a lot. You've told me how I can be helpful to the people of Afghanistan, the LGBTQI community members, most especially. This is still a developing story, and we can only wish the people, the LGBT community members of Afghanistan well. We stand with them, we support them, like we said yesterday in our video. We will continue to talk about this issue, we'll continue to it's just a very pathetic situation. We saw the videos, people going over the airports, people falling from planes, people trying to go through the Turkey border, the Pakistan border. It was just a terrible sight. And women gathering at the square and saying that their rights will no longer be their rights will be violated, and the Taliban will allow them to stop. They will no longer be able to walk under the Taliban leadership. It's just very pathetic. So thank you so much, Nemat, for joining us. Nemat Sadat, the first. Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Your concluding remark, I was going to say, you're right. I mean, those horrific images, those scenes of the people climbing on the wings and going to their deaths, knowing that they would die from atmospheric pressure speed. You haven't seen anything like that in a Bollywood, Hollywood, or Nollywood movie. It's just like horrendous. And it reminded me of like 9/11 when people were falling from the burning buildings, you know, and we have to remember that totalitarianism can happen anywhere. So we need to always, as a community, fight back against it and fight for our freedom.
Thank you very much. And thank you for coming on the show, Nemat, Sadat, the first openly gay man in Afghanistan. And thank you, Chimereze Henry, for joining us on the show. Chimereze, all the way from Toronto, Canada. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Mr. Chafo.
Yeah,
I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's our offering for Kiro Talk for this episode, the Breaking News Wahala segment. Join us for next episode. Till next episode, please subscribe. See you guys later. Peace out.